The Olympics are happening in Beijing, and it's a total dystopian nightmare. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. Well, the 2022 Beijing Olympics are a total disaster. And it goes way beyond the record low ratings. Here are 10 ways the Beijing Winter Olympics have become a dystopian nightmare. Number 10. Let's start things off with a good visual of the games. Set the stage. Here's the slope for the freestyle skiing big air competition. Notice the cooling towers in the background? That's because the slope is in the middle of an industrial wasteland. To be fair, it's a reclaimed industrial wasteland. Shougang was a massive industrial park that was closed back in 2011, and now it's being repurposed as a tourist attraction, which is leading to a debate over whether this is inspired or dystopian. But this brings up the bigger issue of how Beijing was an odd choice for the Winter Olympics, because it has no snow. This is the first Winter Olympics that's relied entirely on fake snow. And fake snow needs water. How much water? Roughly 1 million cubic meters, enough to fill 400 Olympic-size swimming pools. And that's just to start the games. And just a reminder, you can celebrate this dystopian Olympics in style with our exclusive t-shirt, Beijing 2022, Fake Snow, Real Genocide. You can buy yours at chinauncensored.tv/merchandise. I'll put a link below. The best part is, the shirt is not made in China. Number 9. China has put a COVID bubble around the Olympics. Anyone involved in the games, whether they're athletes, coaches, reporters, they've all been completely cut off from the rest of society. So you get weird things like this. A bartender mixing cocktails in a full hazmat suit. I think they call that a quarantini. Robots were making burgers. That is, when they didn't break down. And of course, Olympic athletes were greeted by this friendly guy administering COVID tests. And COVID is still spreading. Remember the 2008 Beijing Olympics, when the Chinese regime was pulling out all the stops to impress the world with how amazing and wonderful it was? It feels like they're not really trying this time around. Number 8. Olympic athletes need to be in top physical condition to be able to compete. And the Chinese Communist Party is making sure foreign athletes in quarantine can't do that. This is what a Russian biathlon competitor said they were feeding her. Pasta, orange sauce, meat, and potatoes for breakfast, lunch, and dinner for 5 days straight. She wrote, "My stomach hurts. I'm very pale and I have huge black circles around my eyes. I want all this to end. I cry every day. I'm very tired." On top of that, there's little to no internet, the rooms aren't hygienic, and there's no training equipment. But the problems for Olympic athletes were just beginning. I'll have more after the break. Welcome back. As if bad food wasn't enough, foreign Olympic athletes had much worse to deal with. Number 7. As I said, China has created a COVID bubble around the Olympic Games. And Belgian skeleton racer Kim Meilemans found out the hard way what that means. She tested positive for COVID when she landed in Beijing. She was put into quarantine. After a few days, she tested negative twice, so she thought she was going to be released. An ambulance came to pick her up. Here's what happened.
On the way to the village, we did not turn to the village, but the ambulance went to another facility where I am now.
So she was told she had to stay in this government facility for 7 more days, with no contact with anyone. A few hours after she posted that video, Chinese authorities released her due to international pressure. But the whole thing is definitely not a great way to prepare your mind and body for the Olympics. Of course, you might now be wondering if the Chinese Communist Party might be trying to fix the games. Well, number 6. Chinese judges are being accused of bias. A Hungarian skater crossed the finish line first in a men's speed skating event. But guess what? He was disqualified, so the Chinese runner-up took the gold. athletes from the US and Russia also got disqualified. However, Chinese athletes were not punished. And then there was this story. Female athletes from Germany, Austria, Norway, and Japan, the 4 biggest ski jumping nations, were disqualified for baggy clothes. Germany called it a parody. Only no one's laughing. And after the break, things get even creepier. Welcome back. As if the starvation, harassment, and accusations of judging bias weren't enough, there are some even scarier things going on behind the scenes at the Beijing Olympics. Number 5. This is Kimberly Newell. Her Chinese name is Zhou Jiaying. She's Canadian-born, but has chosen to play as the goalie for China's hockey team. Now, again, born and raised in Canada. She went to school at Princeton. Here's what happened when reporters tried asking her some questions. Goaltender Zhou Jiaying answered questions in halting Chinese, and was then asked by a reporter if she could take a few questions in English. Her aide then said, she's not allowed to speak English. Totally normal. Newell isn't the only foreign-born athlete competing for China. There's been a lot of attention on American-born skier Eileen Gu, who won gold for China, as well as American-born figure skater Ju Yi, who got a different kind of attention after she fell several times in the competition. Speaking of Chinese athletes, number 4, Peng Shuai, you remember her. She's the tennis star who accused a top Chinese Communist Party member of sexual assault, then disappeared, and then reappeared after an international outcry, saying everything is fine and she never claimed she was sexually assaulted. Well, she was at the Olympics. In fact, she was interviewed for the first time by an independent international media. And once again, she denied she was sexually assaulted. She also announced her retirement from tennis and said, "My life has been what it's supposed to be. Nothing special." That's a weird thing to say. And then people noticed what looked like a Chinese official watching her. Activists are warning it was basically a forced confession. No, it was all totally normal. Just like when Peng Shuai watched Eileen Gu win a gold medal while sitting next to the president of the IOC, while wearing extremely patriotic clothing. Everything's fine. Number 3. Here's what happened to a Dutch reporter during his live shot at the Olympic opening ceremony. The International Olympic Committee said, "Don't worry, it was just an isolated incident." The plainclothes man who pulled him off camera was wearing a red badge that read, "Public Safety Volunteer." The reporter had also been assigned a minder. But the Communist Party is keeping tabs on reporters in other ways too. The Olympics app that everyone is required to download is pure spyware. But the party knows it can get away with it, because no one is really standing up to it. Certainly not the International Olympic Committee, which is bent over backwards to appease the regime. But there's an even more shocking way the party is asserting itself. Number 2. Everyone's been talking about the genocide of Uyghur Muslims that is happening right now while the Olympic Games are going on. Does the Chinese Communist Party care? No. In fact, during the opening ceremony, they had a Uyghur cross-country skier light the Olympic cauldron. The NBC News anchor and Olympics co-host called it a stunning decision. It's so striking and so provocative by Xi Jinping, and a real message. According to the Wall Street Journal, after lighting the Olympic cauldron, that Uyghur skier disappeared from the spotlight. She slipped away after her Olympic event, even though athletes are required to walk through an area with reporters. Perhaps Chinese officials didn't want foreign journalists to ask any uncomfortable questions. And finally, number 1. China expects a lot out of its Olympic athletes, and when they fail, there can be quite the backlash, as there was with Ju Yi. Do you think the Olympics are about sportsmanship and bringing the world together? No. They're about winning gold medals for the motherland. And Chinese officials will do whatever they can for a competitive advantage. According to the South China Morning Post, China is now selecting athletes based on their DNA. And when nature can't give them an advantage, there's always nurture, meaning rigorous training bordering on abuse. A former Chinese figure skater described the dehumanizing training abuse she suffered. She was regularly hit with a plastic skate guard after she made mistakes. And another punishment involved being kicked so hard with the toe pick of a skate that it bloodied her shin and left a lasting scar. Years ago, I did a full episode about the hard life of Chinese athletes. It's pretty unsettling, but check it out. The link is below. Now, that episode was from 2013. Chinese officials claim they have made a lot of improvements in how they treat athletes now, which may not be across the board since the interview with that figure skater was from 2020. But you know who was instrumental in getting better treatment for Chinese athletes? It was actually Peng Shuai. Back in the mid-2000s, Peng was one of several tennis players who broke away from China's state-run training program by threatening to stop playing. At the time, players had to give more than half of their earnings to the state, and they didn't have any say in their training. Peng and the other players were given special status, allowing them to keep roughly 90% of their income, set their own schedules, and choose their coaches. That was the deal as long as they kept winning for China. We could not do the show without your support. And to thank the fans who contribute on Patreon or Locals, I answer their questions at the end of each episode. Today's question comes from Bitter Comments on Patreon. So realistically, how easily could the CCP utilize these athletes' DNA for purposes of genetic engineering? From what I understand, the technology isn't yet good enough to create a super soldier. Now that is a good question. I mentioned in today's episode about how China uses DNA to select athletes. But there's also been concern China will harvest the DNA data of foreign Olympic athletes. After all, they have harvested DNA data from ethnic minorities. So could China take Olympic DNA to create a super soldier? China is trying to create super soldiers. And we know the Chinese Communist Party is totally willing to do some very unethical medical things. Beyond just killing prisoners of conscience for their organs, I mean. Remember a few years ago when a Chinese researcher made those CRISPR twins, genetically modified humans? I think if the Chinese regime sees an opportunity, they won't let medical ethics hold them back. Thank you for your question and your support, Bitter Comments. And if you like China Uncensored and want us to keep making episodes, sign up now to the China Uncensored 50-cent army over at patreon.com/China Uncensored. You get a bunch of cool perks and you'll be helping us expose the Chinese Communist Party. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.